Right, so if we just...
I don't need your help, people without proper training. If you help out, that's embarrassing for us. I don't need your help. You are the people without proper training. If you help out, that's embarrassing for us.
When Professor Williams mocked the janitor for daring to correct his advanced calculus equation, he had no idea he was
I don't
about
need your
to
help.
be schooled
You are the
by
people
a
without proper
mathematical
training.
genius who
If you help out,
sacrificed
that's
her
embarrassing for
PhD
us.
to save her family. What happened next didn't just silence an arrogant teacher. It changed an entire university forever. In the polished marble halls of Princeton University, where Nobel laureates' portraits line the walls and the scent of privilege mingles with fresh coffee from the faculty lounge, a woman in navy blue coveralls moves silently through shadows. Her cleaning cart wheels squeak rhythmically against the floor as she empties trash cans and wipes down whiteboards, covered in complex equations that most graduate students struggle to comprehend. No. One knows that Diana Washington has memorized every formula on every board. She's cleaned for the past 3 years. No one even notices when she pauses, her dark eyes scanning the mathematical proofs with the precision of someone who once derived them herself. But when Professor Williams and his colleagues gather around the advanced calculus classroom's massive whiteboard, struggling with a differential equation that stumped them for hours, she watches from the doorway. What they didn't know was that this equation was child's play to someone who once published papers on nonlinear dynamics in the Journal of Mathematical Physics, and with just one quiet correction, she was about to shatter every assumption they'd made about the invisible woman who cleaned their classrooms. The afternoon sun filters through tall windows, casting long shadows across the pristine classroom where Professor Williams stands with 3 other faculty members, their expensive suits contrasting sharply with Diana's modest uniform. She's been cleaning the same corner for 10 minutes now, moving her mop in slow circles while her ears tune into their heated discussion. The integral diverges at this point, Professor Williams declares, tapping his expensive pen against the board with growing frustration. We've been at this for 2 hours, and I'm starting to think the problem itself is flawed. Dr. Martinez, the department head, loosens his tie and sighs. The university board expects this proof by Friday. If we can't solve it, we'll lose the research grant. Diana's hand tightens on her mop handle. She's seen this exact type of problem before. In fact, she'd solved a more complex version during her doctoral research at MIT. Back when she was Dr. Diana Washington, rising star in the mathematics department, before life forced her to make impossible choices. Maybe we should call Harvard, see if Professor Chen can help, suggests Dr. Roberts, the youngest of the group, his voice carrying the defeat of someone who's exhausted all options. The words slip out before Diana can stop them. The limit needs to be evaluated using L'Hopital's rule twice, then apply integration by parts with U substitution for the logarithmic component. Dead silence falls over the room like a heavy curtain. 4 pairs of eyes turn toward her, expressions ranging from confusion to outright indignation. Diana's heart pounds against her ribs as she realizes what she's just done. She's broken the invisible barrier that has protected her for 3 years, the barrier that allows her to work in peace while supporting her sick mother and younger sister. Professor Williams's eyebrows arch with the kind of condescending amusement reserved for particularly audacious interruptions. "Excuse me?" His voice drips with the patronizing tone of someone addressing a child who's just suggested they can drive a car. Did our janitor just attempt to solve a graduate-level calculus problem? The other professors exchange glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and barely contained laughter. Dr. Martinez clears his throat, trying to maintain professional decorum while clearly struggling not to smile. "I'm sorry," Professor Williams continues, his voice growing louder and more theatrical, as if he's performing for an audience. "But unless you have a PhD in mathematics hidden in that cleaning cart, I suggest you stick to mopping floors and leave the thinking to people who actually understand what these symbols mean. Diana's face burns with humiliation, but something deeper stirs beneath the embarrassment. A familiar fire that once drove her through countless nights of research, the same determination that earned her summa cum laude honors and a full fellowship to MIT. She sets down her mop with deliberate precision, her movements measured and calm despite the storm brewing inside her chest. "You're right," she says quietly, her voice steady as steel. "I should stick to what I know." She turns to leave, her cleaning cartwheels squeaking their familiar rhythm as she heads toward the door. But this time, the sound doesn't fade into background noise. This time, it echoes like a challenge in the pristine silence of academic arrogance. Because sometimes, the person you underestimate is exactly the one who holds the answer you've been desperately searching for. And sometimes, 3 years of silence is about to become the loudest lesson anyone has ever heard. Before we continue with Diana's incredible story, I need to ask you something important. Stories like this, about brilliant people who are overlooked and underestimated, happen every single day in workplaces, schools, and communities around the world. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, please hit that subscribe button. On a scale of 1 to 10, how angry did that professor's response make you? Drop your rating in the comments, because I have a feeling it's about to get a lot higher. This channel is dedicated to sharing stories that matter. Stories about everyday heroes whose intelligence, courage, and dignity shine through even when others try to dim their light. We upload new inspirational stories every week, so make sure you ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next, because Diana's response is about to change everything. Diana Washington had worked at Princeton University for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone had ever asked, but she kept count the way she kept count of everything else, with the precision of someone whose mind never stops calculating, measuring, analyzing the world around her. Every morning at 6 a.m., she clocked in through the service entrance, exchanged quiet greetings with the security guard who knew her by name but not her story, and began her route through the mathematics building. Her cart was organized with mathematical precision, cleaning supplies arranged by frequency of use, rags folded in perfect squares, her worn leather notebook hidden beneath a pile of paper towels, the same notebook that contained theories and proofs she worked on during her lunch breaks, ideas that could advance the field by decades. The professors and graduate students walked by her as if she were part of the furniture, a functional necessity, like the whiteboards and desks, present but invisible. They discussed their research projects in her presence, debated theoretical frameworks, complained about funding challenges, never once considering that the woman emptying their trash cans might understand every word of their academic discourse. But Diana watched. She always watched. And more than that, she listened, learned, and silently solved problems that kept brilliant minds awake at night. On that Tuesday afternoon in October, when the autumn sun painted the hallways in shades of gold and amber, Diana heard something that made her stomach clench with a mixture of recognition and dread. She was cleaning the faculty lounge when she overheard Professor Williams on the phone with the university board. "The Whitman research grant depends on solving this proof," he was saying, his voice tight with stress. "If we can't demonstrate breakthrough research in nonlinear dynamics by Friday, they'll award the funding to MIT instead. We're talking about $2.8 million and the department's reputation. Nonlinear dynamics, Diana's specialized field, the area where she'd published 6 peer-reviewed papers before her life imploded and forced her to disappear from the academic world. She knew exactly which proof they were struggling with. She'd seen it on Professor Williams's whiteboard for weeks, watched him make the same computational errors over and over again. witnessed his growing frustration as he approached the problem from the wrong angle entirely. When Diana moved closer to the classroom, her cleaning supplies forgotten, those words weren't foreign to her. They were home. They were the language she'd spoken fluently before life demanded she learn a different vocabulary. Words like insurance claims and medical bills and "we're sorry, but there's nothing more we can do," she whispered. Without thinking, the convergence issue is in the boundary conditions. You need to reformulate the integral. Professor Williams, who had been gesturing emphatically at the board while explaining the problem to his colleagues, stopped mid-sentence. He turned around with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who couldn't quite believe what they'd just heard. "I'm sorry. What?" His voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose concentration has been broken by an unexpected interruption. "Nothing, sir," Diana replied quickly, reaching for her spray bottle to busy her hands. "Just the integral, the way you've set up the boundary conditions creates a false discontinuity." Dr. Martinez let out a short laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Well, this is rich. Our custodial staff thinks they can solve mathematical proofs now." He looked at his colleagues with an expression that clearly said, "Can you believe this?" Professor Williams's face flushed red with irritation and embarrassment. Here he was, struggling with a problem in front of his peers, and now the janitor was offering suggestions? "Listen," he said with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe you should focus on cleaning and leave the advanced mathematics to people who actually went to college." The dismissal hit Diana like a physical blow, but something had shifted inside her. For 3 years, she'd remained invisible, content to solve problems in her head while scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. But hearing Professor Williams speak to her like she was intellectually inferior, when she knew she could solve his problem in under 10 minutes, ignited a spark she'd thought was permanently extinguished. Diana walked away. But this time the humiliation felt different. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was righteous indignation finally waking up after a long, necessary sleep. Because she knew something that Professor Williams didn't know. She knew exactly who she was, even if he couldn't see past her uniform and her skin color and his own unconscious biases. That wasn't just another dismissed suggestion from the help. That was Dr. Diana Washington, former MIT fellowship recipient, published researcher and mathematical genius, being told she wasn't smart enough to understand concepts she had literally written about in academic journals. The fire that had once driven her through doctoral coursework, the same intellectual passion that made her professors call her a once-in-a-generation mind, began to burn again. And for the first time in 3 years, Diana Washington wasn't thinking about staying invisible. She was thinking about what it might feel like to step back into the light. The next morning, Diana arrived at work 30 minutes early, her mind churning with equations and possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate in years. The mathematics building was still quiet, bathed in the soft gray light of dawn, when she made her way to Professor Williams's classroom. The whiteboard still displayed his flawed proof, the equations marching across the surface like soldiers in a failed battle formation. She stood there for a long moment, her cleaning supplies forgotten, studying the work with the critical eye of someone who understood not just what was wrong, but why it was wrong and exactly how to fix it. Her fingers itched to pick up a marker, to show these equations what they could become in the hands of someone who truly understood their potential. Starting early today, I see. Diana turned to find Professor Williams in the doorway, his coffee cup steaming in the cool morning air. His expression was neutral, but she caught something in his eyes, perhaps curiosity, perhaps lingering irritation from yesterday's interaction. "Yes, sir," she replied, reaching for her spray bottle. "Just wanted to get a head start on the day." He walked to his desk, setting down his briefcase with the practiced movements of someone following a well-established routine. "About yesterday," he said without looking at her, "I hope there are no hard feelings. It's just that we professors take our work very seriously. We can't have interruptions during important discussions. The word interruptions landed like a slap. Diana's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. Of course, sir. I understand my place. Good. Professor Williams pulled out his lecture notes, then glanced at the whiteboard with visible frustration. Though I have to admit, we're still struggling with this proof. The department head is breathing down my neck, and if we don't make progress soon— He trailed off, perhaps realizing he was sharing too much with the janitor. 20 minutes later, the classroom began filling with graduate students for the advanced calculus seminar. Diana had moved to the back corner, ostensibly organizing supplies while actually listening to every word of the lecture. Professor Williams stood before the problematic equation, his confidence from the morning already beginning to crack. As you can see, he said to his students, this particular proof has been giving us some trouble. The integral appears to diverge at the critical point, which suggests either an error in our methodology or a fundamental flaw in the theoretical framework itself. One of the graduate students, a young woman with thick glasses and nervous energy, raised her hand. Professor Williams, have you tried approaching it as a contour integral? Maybe the divergence is just apparent. We've tried multiple approaches. Sarah, contour integration, series expansion, numerical approximation. Nothing seems to work. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd exhausted all conventional options. Another student chimed in, what about consulting with other universities? MIT has some brilliant people working in nonlinear dynamics. Diana's cleaning rag froze in her hand. MIT, her alma mater. The place where she'd been, Dr. Washington, where professors had called her work groundbreaking and revolutionary, where she'd been 3 months away from completing her postdoctoral research when her mother's cancer diagnosis changed everything. We may have to, Professor Williams admitted, his professional pride clearly wounded by the suggestion. But I was hoping we could solve this in-house. This proof could establish our department's reputation in the field. Without thinking, Diana spoke up from the back corner. The problem isn't the integral itself. It's the way you've defined the domain boundaries. You're creating a false singularity. The classroom fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, the graduate students looking confused, and Professor Williams looking mortified. Diana realized she'd crossed a line, but the mathematical error was so glaring, so obviously fixable, that staying quiet felt like watching someone repeatedly walk into a glass door. "Excuse me," Professor Williams said, his voice dangerously quiet. "But this is a graduate-level seminar. I don't recall inviting commentary from the custodial staff." One of the male graduate students snickered. "Maybe we should start requiring janitors to solve our homework too," he whispered to his neighbor, loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter that rippled through the classroom felt like acid on Diana's skin. But she didn't back down. The Riemann sum converges if you adjust the partition to account for the logarithmic scaling. Your boundary conditions assume linear behavior in a fundamentally non-linear system. Professor Williams's face had progressed from red to purple. "That's enough!" he snapped. "I don't know where you think you learned these terms, but throwing around mathematical vocabulary doesn't make you a mathematician. This is embarrassing for both of us." He turned to address his students, his voice now carrying the theatrical quality of someone making an example. "Class, this is what happens when people without proper training try to engage with advanced mathematical concepts. They hear buzzwords and think they understand the underlying theory, but they lack the foundational knowledge to recognize their own limitations." The graduate students were fully engaged now, some looking uncomfortable with the public humiliation unfolding before them, others clearly enjoying the spectacle. Diana felt her cheeks burn with shame. But beneath the embarrassment, something harder and more determined was crystallizing. "I apologize for the interruption," she said quietly, gathering her supplies. I'll let you get back to your lecture." As she moved toward the door, Professor Williams delivered his final blow. "In the future, please remember that there's a reason some people clean blackboards and others write on them. Education and natural ability are not the same thing." Diana paused at the doorway, her hand on the cart handle. For a moment, the old fire blazed so bright she could barely see. She thought about her dissertation defense, where she'd fielded questions from professors who couldn't find flaws in her work. She thought about the standing ovation she'd received at the International Conference on Mathematical Physics. She thought about the job offers from Harvard, Stanford, and Cambridge that she'd turned down to stay close to her family. "You're absolutely right, Professor," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made several students look up sharply. "Education and natural ability are definitely not the same thing. Some people spend years studying something they'll never truly understand, while others can see the solution the moment they look at the problem." She left the classroom to stunned silence, her cartwheels squeaking their familiar rhythm down the hallway. But this time the sound wasn't invisible. This time it sounded like a countdown to something inevitable. Because Diana Washington had just remembered exactly who she was, and she was done being invisible. In her small apartment on the outskirts of town, where textbooks shared shelf space with medical bills and family photos, Diana sat at her kitchen table with a worn leather portfolio that hadn't been opened in 3 years. The cover was embossed with gold letters that had faded, but were still readable. Dr. Diana Washington, Ph.D. Mathematics, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. On the pages inside, certificates and awards told the story of a brilliant mind that had once blazed like a comet through academic circles. Her undergraduate diploma from Howard University, graduated summa cum laude at 19. Her master's thesis on advanced calculus, which had been published in 3 separate journals. Photos from conferences where she'd presented research that made seasoned professors shake their heads in amazement. Back then, mathematics was her language, her art, her religion. She could see patterns where others saw chaos, find elegant solutions to problems that had stumped researchers for decades. The differential equations that Professor Williams struggled with were like children's puzzles to someone who had derived new theorems in nonlinear dynamics, while most people her age were still figuring out their career paths. The last time she'd touched this portfolio, she'd been Dr. Diana Washington, assistant professor at MIT with tenure track approval pending, working on research that could revolutionize how engineers approached complex systems modeling. She had been 3 months away from completing her postdoctoral fellowship, 3 months away from a career that would have taken her to the highest levels of academic achievement. Then the phone call came. Mama's voice, weak and frightened in a way Diana had never heard before. "Baby, the doctors found something. They want to do more tests, but they're saying words like aggressive and stage 3, and I'm scared." The choice hadn't felt like a choice at all. Mama had worked 3 jobs to put Diana through college, had believed in her daughter's potential when no one else could see past the young black girl from the wrong side of town. When the doctors said the treatment would require constant care, when they explained that the good insurance was only available for experimental treatments in New Jersey, when Diana calculated the cost of keeping her mother alive against her academic salary, she never hesitated. She walked away from MIT, from her research, from a future that had sparkled like stars. She moved back home, became her mother's caregiver, and took the first job she could find that offered health insurance and flexible hours. The Princeton University custodial position paid enough to cover the medical bills and support her younger sister's college tuition. And the night shift meant she could spend days at the hospital during her mother's treatments. For 2 years, she'd divided her time between mopping floors and holding her mother's hand through chemotherapy sessions. She'd solved complex mathematical proofs in her head while cleaning toilets, derived new theoretical frameworks while emptying trash cans, published exactly 0 papers while watching the love of her life fade away one treatment at a time. Mama died on a Thursday morning in spring, surrounded by cherry blossoms and the sound of Diana whispering equations like prayers. The funeral was small but dignified. Diana stood graveside in her best black dress, the same dress she'd worn to defend her doctoral thesis, and felt the last connection to her academic life slip away like water through her fingers. But even after the funeral, even after her grief began to evolve into something she could carry without drowning, Diana didn't go back to MIT. Her sister was still in college, still needed support. The mathematical world had moved on without her. 3 years was an eternity in academic research. Her colleagues had probably forgotten her name, assumed she'd burned out, or lacked the dedication for serious scholarship. So she kept cleaning, kept working nights, kept solving other people's problems in silence. Until today, when Professor Williams's arrogance and condescension had awakened something that grief and necessity had forced into hibernation. Now, sitting in her kitchen under the fluorescent light that flickered intermittently, Diana opened her laptop, the same computer where she'd written groundbreaking research papers, and began to type. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory that 3 years of silence hadn't erased. Formulating a solution to Professor Williams's proof with the kind of elegant simplicity that had once made her professors call her work poetry written in numbers. The math flowed onto the screen like water, finding its natural course. She approached the problem from 3 different angles, each more sophisticated than Professor Williams's attempts, each revealing new layers of understanding about the underlying mathematical relationships. What had stumped him for weeks, she solved in 47 minutes, including the time she spent double-checking her work and formatting the solution for maximum clarity. When she finished, Diana printed the pages and placed them in a manila envelope. On the outside, she wrote in her precise handwriting, "Solution to the non-linear dynamics proof," for Professor Williams's consideration. She looked at her reflection in the kitchen window, seeing the woman she'd become overlaid with the ghost of who she'd been. Dr. Diana Washington hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to resurface, and tomorrow morning, she would walk into that pristine university building not as the invisible janitor, but as the mathematician she'd never stopped being. "I didn't leave mathematics, Mama," she whispered to the empty apartment, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of silence and the promise of what was about to unfold. "Mathematics never left me. I just had to walk away for love." That night, Diana didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table working on mathematical proofs with the passionate intensity of someone who'd been holding their breath for 3 years and had finally remembered how to breathe. Outside her window, the city slept, unaware that tomorrow would bring a reckoning that would change not just Professor Williams's understanding of the woman who cleaned his classroom, but the entire university's definition of what genius looks like. Because sometimes, the most brilliant minds are hiding in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, underestimating someone is the biggest mistake you'll ever make. The campus was still asleep when Diana stepped outside her apartment at 4:30 a.m., the manila envelope tucked securely under her arm like a secret weapon. The October air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change. She had exactly 2 hours before her official shift began. 2 hours to execute a plan that would either vindicate 3 years of silence or destroy the careful anonymity she'd built around herself like armor. She entered the mathematics building through the service entrance, using her keycard with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. The hallways stretched before her in familiar patterns, but this morning they felt different, charged with potential, electric with possibility. The faculty lounge was empty and dark. Diana moved through it with practiced silence, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. She knew Professor Williams's routine by heart. He arrived every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, stopped at his mailbox, then went directly to the faculty lounge for his first cup of coffee while reviewing his lecture notes. His mailbox slot was the third one from the top, labeled with a brass nameplate that read, Professor Jonathan Williams, Ph.D. Diana slipped the manila envelope inside, positioning it so the white corner would be immediately visible when he opened the box. On the envelope's front, her handwriting was precise and professional. Proof solution. Urgent review requested. Phase 1 complete. Diana returned to her cart and began her usual cleaning routine. But every movement was calculated now, every task performed with the precision of someone executing a carefully orchestrated plan. She cleaned the faculty lounge thoroughly, ensuring she would have legitimate reason to be there when Professor Williams arrived. She positioned herself at the coffee station, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless, arranging supplies that were already perfectly organized. At 6:58 a.m., she heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway. Confident, measured, the walk of a man accustomed to authority and respect. Diana kept her eyes focused on her work, but her peripheral vision tracked his movement as he approached the mailboxes. What the hell? His voice carried clearly in the quiet space. Diana glanced over to see Professor Williams holding the envelope, his expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and curiosity. He tore it open with the quick, efficient movements of someone accustomed to handling correspondence, then went completely still as he began reading the first page. His coffee cup, forgotten in his other hand, grew cold as minutes passed. Diana watched his face transform, the casual dismissal giving way to focused attention, then to surprise, then to something that looked uncomfortably like awe. He flipped through the pages rapidly, then started over from the beginning, reading more slowly this time. "This is," he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible. "This is actually correct." Diana maintained her cleaning routine, but her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. 3 years of mathematical silence were about to break wide open, and there was no going back from what happened next. Professor Williams pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Martinez? You need to get down to the faculty lounge right now." "No, I'm serious. Drop whatever you're doing and get down here. We have a situation. Within 10 minutes, the faculty lounge had transformed into an impromptu conference room. Dr. Martinez, Dr. Roberts, and 2 other mathematics professors Diana didn't recognize stood around the table where Professor Williams had spread out her solution. Their voices overlapped in excitement and disbelief. "The boundary condition reformulation is brilliant," Dr. Roberts was saying, his finger tracing the equations on page 2. "I never would have thought to approach the convergence problem from this angle." "But who submitted this?" Dr. Martinez demanded. "There's no name on it, no departmental letterhead." "Did someone from Harvard send this? MIT? Professor Williams shook his head. "It was in my mailbox this morning. Anonymous. But look at this work. This isn't just correct. It's elegant. Whoever wrote this has a deep understanding of nonlinear dynamics that goes way beyond standard graduate coursework." Dr. Martinez examined the envelope. "The handwriting is careful, precise. Feminine, I'd say. Could be one of our graduate students?" "No," Professor Williams replied firmly. "I know our students' work. This is something else entirely. This person isn't just solving the problem. They're revealing new insights about the underlying mathematical relationships. This could be publishable in the Journal of Mathematical Physics." Diana continued her cleaning, invisible among the excited academics, listening to them praise work she'd completed in less than an hour at her kitchen table. The irony was so profound it was almost funny. Here were 5 Ph.D. mathematicians marveling at a solution from the woman they'd dismissed as intellectually inferior just yesterday. "We need to find out who submitted this," Dr. Martinez declared. "This level of mathematical sophistication, whoever wrote this could be a valuable addition to our research team." Professor Williams nodded eagerly. "I'll check the security cameras." The building was locked last night, so whoever left this had authorized access. That narrows it down significantly. Diana's pulse quickened. Security cameras. She'd anticipated this possibility, but hearing him say it made the reality concrete. By this afternoon, they would know exactly who had slipped that envelope into his mailbox. Her anonymity, her carefully constructed invisibility, would be shattered completely. She finished wiping down the last counter and quietly gathered her supplies. As she wheeled her cart toward the door, she caught fragments of their continued discussion. Words like breakthrough and revolutionary, and we need to contact the journal immediately. In the hallway, Diana paused and took a deep breath. In a few hours, Professor Williams would review the security footage. He would see her approaching his mailbox, see her slip the envelope inside, and realize that the mathematical genius he was so desperate to find was the same woman he'd humiliated in front of his students. The same woman he'd told to stick to cleaning and leave the thinking to her. Betters. Diana smiled as she continued down the hallway, her cartwheels squeaking their familiar rhythm. But this time, the sound seemed different, like a drumbeat announcing the arrival of something long overdue. The revolution was about to begin. By 2 p.m., Professor Williams had reviewed the security footage 3 times, each viewing making the impossible reality more undeniable. There, in black and white digital clarity, was Diana Washington approaching his mailbox at 4:47 a.m., sliding the envelope inside with the same careful precision she applied to every task, then disappearing down the hallway like a ghost carrying secrets. "That's the janitor," whispered Dr. Roberts, leaning closer to the monitor as if proximity might change what they were seeing. That's actually the woman we laughed at yesterday." Professor Williams sat in stunned silence, his world tilting on an axis he hadn't realized existed. The mathematical solution spread across his desk suddenly took on new meaning. This wasn't just brilliant work. It was a quiet demolition of every assumption he'd made about intelligence, education, and worth. "Her name is Diana Washington," he said finally, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. "She's worked here for 3 years. 3 years, and we never—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because the truth was too uncomfortable to speak aloud. Dr. Martinez picked up Diana's solution and studied it again, as if the equations might reveal how he'd been so spectacularly wrong about their author. "We need to talk to her immediately. If she can produce work at this level, we need to understand how and why she's working as custodial staff." An hour later, Diana received a message through the university's internal communication system. "Ms. Washington, please report to conference room 204 at 4 p.m. today. Dr. Martinez, department head." The tone was formal but urgent, carrying implications that made Diana's stomach flutter with a mixture of anticipation and dread. At exactly 4 p.m., Diana knocked on the conference room door, still wearing her navy blue uniform, her cleaning supplies left behind for the first time during work hours. When she entered, she found herself facing 5 professors seated around a polished mahogany table, with her mathematical solutions spread out between them like evidence in a trial. Professor Williams looked up as she entered, his face cycling through emotions she'd never seen from him. Confusion, embarrassment, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. "Ms. Washington," he began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to begin a conversation that would rewrite everything he thought he knew. "You want to know who I am?" Diana said quietly, settling into the chair across from them with the calm dignity of someone who'd anticipated this moment for hours. "So I'll tell you." She reached into her bag and placed her worn leather portfolio on the table, the gold lettering catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The professors leaned forward as she opened it, revealing diplomas, certificates, and photographs that told the story of Dr. Diana Washington's academic achievements. "I graduated summa cum laude from Howard University at 19, she began, her voice steady and clear. Completed my PhD in mathematics at MIT at 23. Published 6 peer-reviewed papers in nonlinear dynamics before I was 25. I was 3 months away from completing my postdoctoral fellowship when my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Professor Williams's face had gone completely pale. You have a doctorate? I was Dr. Diana Washington, she corrected gently. Assistant professor at MIT, tenure track approved, working on research that could have revolutionized complex systems modeling. But my mother needed care that only I could provide, and the insurance that came with custodial work here covered her experimental treatments. Dr. Martinez leaned back in his chair, the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. You gave up your academic career to take care of your family? Diana nodded. For 2 years, I divided my time between night shifts and hospital rooms. I solved mathematical proofs in my head while cleaning bathrooms, derived new theoretical frameworks while emptying trash cans. After she died, I stayed because my sister needed support through college, and because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I'd been invisible for so long, I'd forgotten how to be seen. The room fell into profound silence. Professor Williams stared at the mathematical solution with new eyes, finally understanding the weight of what he'd dismissed yesterday. This wasn't just correct work. It was the product of a mind that had been forced underground, but had never stopped being brilliant. The proof you solved, Dr. Roberts said hesitantly. You completed it in how long? 47 minutes, Diana replied, including formatting and verification. The approach you were taking created unnecessary complexity. Sometimes the most elegant solutions are also the simplest. Professor Williams buried his face in his hands. Yesterday, in front of my students, I told you that some people clean blackboards, and others write on them. I said education and natural ability weren't the same thing. You were right, Diana said, her voice carrying no malice, only truth. They're not the same thing. I've spent 3 years watching professors struggle with concepts I could explain in my sleep. I've seen graduate students fail to grasp theories I developed during my master's thesis. Education opens doors, but understanding comes from somewhere deeper. Why didn't you tell us? Dr. Martinez asked, his voice thick with regret. Why suffer through the condescension and dismissal when you could have... Could have what? Diana's voice sharpened slightly. Walked into your offices and announced I was a MIT PhD hiding among the custodial staff? Would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was delusional? Another victim of imposter syndrome who'd confused taking advanced classes with actually understanding advanced concepts. The accuracy of her assessment hung in the air like smoke. Every professor in that room knew she was right. If a black woman in a janitor's uniform had claimed to be a mathematics doctorate, they would have dismissed her as mentally unstable rather than considered the possibility that genius might be hiding in plain sight. I'm sorry, Professor Williams whispered, the words barely audible. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. Diana looked at him with eyes that held no anger, only the quiet wisdom of someone who had learned to carry dignity through the darkest valleys. I don't need your apologies, she said softly. I need you to remember this feeling the next time you look at someone and think you know what they're capable of based on how they look or what job they hold. She stood and gathered her portfolio, preparing to leave. But Professor Williams's voice stopped her at the door. Wait! He called out, his voice urgent with desperation. What happens now? We can't pretend this never happened. Diana turned back, her expression thoughtful. What happens now is up to you. You can go back to your assumptions, or you can start seeing the people who've been invisible all along. The choice has always been yours. The next morning, Diana stepped into the mathematics building like always, but something fundamental had shifted overnight. The hallways seemed brighter, the air charged with possibility. Word had spread through the academic grapevine with the speed that only scandal and redemption can achieve. By 8 a.m., half the faculty knew that their custodial staff included a mathematical genius who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. As Diana made her way to the faculty lounge to begin her usual routine, she noticed the changes immediately. Professors who had never acknowledged her existence now watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to deep embarrassment. Graduate students whispered as she passed, their voices carrying fragments like published researcher and MIT doctorate and can you believe we never knew? The room fell silent when she entered the faculty lounge. Then, unexpectedly, Dr. Martinez began to clap. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet space before Dr. Roberts joined in, then Professor Williams, then every academic in the room. The applause wasn't polite or perfunctory. It carried the weight of recognition too long delayed, respect finally given where it had always been due. "Dr. Washington," called out Dr. Sarah Chen, a young professor Diana had only seen from a distance. "I just wanted to say that I read your paper on stochastic differential equations from your MIT days. It influenced my own research more than you know." An older professor Diana didn't recognize stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Thompson from the Applied Mathematics Department. I've been following your theoretical work for years. I had no idea you were here. We should have been collaborating all this time." Throughout the morning, the recognition continued. Students who had previously walked past her without a glance now stopped to introduce themselves, their faces bright with genuine excitement at meeting someone whose work they'd studied. Faculty members approached with research questions, seeking her input on problems they'd been struggling with for months. "Professor Washington?" The voice belonged to Emily Rodriguez, one of the graduate students from yesterday's humiliating classroom encounter. The young woman looked mortified as she approached Diana's cleaning station. "I owe you an apology. What happened yesterday? The way we laughed. I am ashamed of my behavior." Diana set down her supplies and really looked at Emily for the first time. Not as an obstacle to avoid, but as a young scholar with genuine remorse in her eyes. "You didn't know," Diana said gently. "None of you did. And that's exactly the point." By noon, Diana found herself in President Harrison's office, facing the university's leadership team across a conference table that gleamed with mahogany and privilege. But this time, she wasn't there to empty trash cans. She was there as Dr. Diana Washington, and everyone in that room knew exactly who she was. "Dr. Washington," President Harrison began, his voice carrying the careful respect of someone who understood he was speaking to intellectual royalty. "We owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. The way you've been treated, the assumptions made about your capabilities, it's inexcusable." Diana listened politely as he outlined the university's formal apology, their investigation into discriminatory practices, their commitment to ensuring this never happened again. But she'd heard institutional promises before. What mattered was what came next. "We'd like to offer you a position," Dr. Martinez said, sliding a folder across the table. "Full professor, tenure track, with a research budget and graduate student assignments. Your choice of courses to teach, freedom to pursue whatever mathematical research interests you." Diana opened the folder and studied the offer. The salary was impressive, the benefits comprehensive, the opportunity to return to the academic world she'd never truly left. But something was missing. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, "but I have conditions." President Harrison leaned forward eagerly. "Name them. Anything you need." "I want to create a program for overlooked talent," Diana said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Students from backgrounds like mine, workers from all departments who might have hidden expertise, community members who never got the chance to show what they could do. I want to identify brilliance wherever it's hiding and give it the support it needs to flourish." The administrators exchanged glances. This wasn't the typical faculty request for more research funding or sabbatical time. This was something bigger, something that could fundamentally change how the university identified and nurtured intellectual potential. "We'll call it the Washington Initiative," President Harrison said, without hesitation. "You'll have full autonomy to design and implement it however you see fit." 3 weeks later, Diana stood at the front of the largest lecture hall on campus, looking out at an audience that reflected the diversity of human experience in ways the university had never seen before. Janitors sat next to professors, cafeteria workers next to graduate students, security guards next to department heads. The Washington Initiative's inaugural symposium had drawn people from every corner of the campus community. "When I was 5 years old," Diana began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "my mama told me that intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, and brilliance doesn't come with credentials. She was right. But it took me years to truly understand what she meant." She clicked to her first slide, a photograph of herself in her custodial uniform, standing next to a whiteboard covered in complex equations. "For 3 years, I cleaned these halls while solving problems that stumped professors. I wasn't bitter about being invisible. I was grateful for the job that supported my family. But I never stopped being who I was at my core." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "Today marks the beginning of something new," Diana continued. "A recognition that genius lives everywhere, in the person who stocks library shelves, in the maintenance worker who fixes broken systems, in the food service employee who calculates complex schedules in their head. We're not looking for hidden PhDs, we're looking for hidden potential." She clicked to the next slide, showing the application for the Washington Initiative's mentorship program. "If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever known you had more to offer but no one to see it, this program is for you. We'll provide education, mentorship, and opportunities. But most importantly, we'll provide something that should never be rare: the belief that every human being has value beyond what their current circumstances might suggest." The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo that seemed to shake the foundations of the building itself. Diana looked out at faces she recognized. Professor Williams, his eyes bright with tears. Emily Rodriguez, clapping with fierce enthusiasm. Dr. Martinez, beaming with pride. But what moved her most were the faces she didn't recognize yet. The ones filled with hope, with the sudden possibility that maybe they too could be seen for who they truly were. "The world is full of hidden treasures," Diana concluded, her voice strong and clear. "Our job isn't to look for them in obvious places. Our job is to create the conditions where they can reveal themselves, where brilliance can emerge from any background, any job, any circumstance." The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. When it finally ended, Diana Washington, former invisible janitor, eternal mathematical genius, and now champion of the overlooked, smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally found her true calling. 6 months later, the Washington Initiative had become the crown jewel of Princeton University's community outreach programs. Diana split her time between advanced mathematical research and mentoring the first cohort of hidden scholars, 12 remarkable individuals whose talents had been discovered through the program. There was Miguel, the night security guard, who turned out to be a gifted poet with 3 self-published collections. Sandra, the cafeteria manager whose intuitive understanding of nutrition and biochemistry led to a collaboration with the medical school. And Jerome, the maintenance technician whose mechanical innovations were now being tested by the engineering department. Professor Williams, transformed by his encounter with Diana, had become one of the program's most passionate advocates. He'd restructured his teaching methods, actively sought diverse perspectives in his classroom, and publicly shared his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unconscious bias. "I learned something that changed my life," he told audiences at education conferences across the country. "I learned that when you think you know someone based on their appearance or their job, you're probably wrong. And that wrongness isn't just their loss, it's yours too." Diana's story had reached far beyond Princeton's campus. News outlets picked it up, social media amplified it, and universities across the nation began implementing their own versions of the Washington Initiative. But for Diana, the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the accolades. It was in the moments when she saw someone else's potential finally being acknowledged. On a quiet Tuesday evening, as Diana worked late in her new office, the same building where she'd once cleaned floors in silence, she received an email that made her smile. It was from a young woman at a university in California. "Dr. Washington, I'm a part-time custodian and full-time dreamer. I heard your story and realized I don't have to choose between supporting my family and pursuing my education. Thank you for showing me that invisible doesn't mean worthless." Diana leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at the campus where she'd spent 3 years being overlooked. The same pathways still wound between the same buildings, but something essential had changed. The university had learned to see its people differently, to value potential over position, to understand that brilliance could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her mother had been right all those years ago. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. But now Diana knew the rest of that. Truth. It was everyone's responsibility to look beyond the uniform and see the person underneath. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the people we least expect to teach us. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hiding in plain sight, waiting not to be found, but to be truly seen. And sometimes, all it takes is one person with the courage to reveal their light, to help everyone else learn how to look for the brilliance that surrounds us every day. The revolution wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, and transformative, just like the woman who started it all.